Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda.
And we're your hosts.
We're a traveling couple and digital nomads taking you on our adventures as we explore locations, destinations, and careers.
Enjoy the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the World Wanderers podcast. Today, we are excited to be chatting with Nathan Pettijohn about his book, Travels with Hafa. Nathan lives in LA and earlier in the past year decided that it was time for an adventure. And so along with his new puppy, Hafa, they took an RV trip around the US and visited lots of places, especially in the Pacific Northwest. And so we were talking to Nathan about his kind of travel backstory, about the decision to go on a big road trip, what traveling with the dog was like, and how he managed work along the way, and a lot more.
Yeah, this was a really fun episode because Ryan and I love a good road trip. We've only ever road tripped in a van, and an RV trip is a great trip to be taking right now with the pandemic. Lots of people aren't leaving their home countries, but lots of us live in really beautiful countries, and being able to rent an RV, take your pet with you, maybe your kids, and head out on the road is a really fun idea. So if you are interested in traveling by vehicle, traveling with an animal, or just traveling in general, this will be a great episode for you. And before we dive into the episode with Nathan, we just wanted to remind you about the World Wanderers Insider. If you want to get access to exclusive episodes monthly that you'll never hear on this feed, you can head on over to patreon.com/The World Wanderers. Some of our recent episodes include a bonus episode on North Korea with J.R. Jabone, and we also have an amazing episode on creating a sustainable and financially successful travel blog with Cam and Natasha from The World Pursuit. So head on over to patreon.com/The World Wanderers to get access to that. All right, now on to the interview with Nathan. Welcome to the podcast today, Nathan. We're super excited to have you here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so we wanted to start by just asking, where in the world are you right now?
I'm in Los Angeles, in Hermosa Beach.
Nice. What's it been like riding out this kind of strange time in Los Angeles?
It's definitely been interesting. I mean, I think a lot of people have been fleeing the cities because, you can work from home and everything. So I've been feeling that same urge to, get back out on the road or go somewhere else. There's no real need to be in a city if you're not going to meetings and things like that. So it's been strange, but it's beautiful here by the beach. So I can't really complain.
Yeah. Is that something you can feel? Because I know if you kind of are on the internet, if you read the news, there's kind of this narrative building of like, oh, everyone's fleeing California. Is that something you kind of like can feel, like friends or connections moving, or do you think that's a bit overblown?
I think it's real. I mean, I guess we hear more about like celebrities and like Joe Rogan and those kind of people leaving town. But yeah, I mean, even just not just COVID, but with the election coming up and everything else, I think that being in some place like the Bahamas or Barbados or something would be a lot more relaxing.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like it's a bit hectic down there, but hopefully everything will kind of, simmer out a little bit over the coming months. And diving into a little bit of your story, we're curious kind of what your backstory was like before the trip that you did with Hafa.
Sure. I grew up in Oklahoma, in a suburb outside of Tulsa. I moved to Los Angeles when I was 19, in 2008, or at the end of 2008. And I studied film. And my first job in LA was working as an assistant to a film producer named Robert Lawrence. I did that for about a year or so, but that was the only job that I ever had where I had to go into an office and like work 9 to 5. So after that, I started my own company. It's a digital marketing firm called Corduroy. And that was in 2011. So I've basically been able to work remotely for the last 10 years, but I didn't really take full advantage of it. I think the last 3 years or so are when I've really started, traveling. And, I've always loved traveling or the idea of traveling, but really these last 3 years I started doing it. And, I guess my last book was kind of a impetus for it. It was called Zen and the Art of Admin Tasks. And I co-wrote it with a friend, and it was a real short tactical guide about how he and I outsource our emails and some of our admin tasks to a virtual assistant. And, it was basically like a real short, like 40-page kind of deal. So it wasn't, like a literary masterpiece, but it was very useful for us. So we decided to put it out. And, essentially it was like, this admin responds to our emails for us based on templates and rules. So you're still getting an email that says from Nathan, but, she's sending it and it's coming really quickly. And so as soon as we had that in place, he and I went to Cuba with a couple of our friends. And we didn't even have internet access or anything most of the time. But when we would check our emails, our friends would be like frantically responding to theirs and trying to keep their businesses afloat. And Nick and I would just be like looking at our emails, scrolling through, and we'd have all these responses from people saying like, thanks for the quick response. Tuesday sounds great, yada, yada, yada. So that kind of process really allowed me to be able to go off the grid a little bit more and keep the business running. In that same year, I did Brazil for like 3 or 4 weeks, and then I did Colombia, and then I went back to Brazil for like 5.5 weeks. So I really got into travel after that, and having those kind of systems in place to be able to outsource things really enabled me.
Yeah, it's kind of like one of those things where you get feedback and they're like, your communication skills have really improved lately. And you're like,
Yeah.
wait.
Totally.
From that stretch of time, what was that experience like of kind of getting out of traveling more, of kind of realizing you have maybe a little bit more freedom than you thought when it came to, being in like work mode and kind of a bit more stressed?
Yeah, I mean, I still got the same amount of work done. It's just about working smarter instead of harder. So I think I was a lot happier. I think seeing all these different places gave me a lot more perspective, and I learned a lot. Even that first trip to Cuba, before I went there, so we didn't stay at like a fancy hotel or anything. We just stayed at an Airbnb and just like a regular neighborhood there in Havana. And it was just really, you get a sense of the poverty and the downsides of communism, and just the state-run media, newspapers and things, and just really getting to soak in that kind of stuff. Like I came back with an actual opinion about communism and about these things, whereas before I'd gone there, I just kind of had the perceptions that I had been told or read about. But it's nothing like going there and being there in person and learning, from the individuals that live there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we haven't been to Cuba in particular, but I think we can really relate to that. And these things that you learn about in school, or maybe you've heard about on the news or the media in your home country, you go and visit somewhere and you just get this whole different perspective in terms of learning about something, which I think is a really empowering experience as a human. And it's also very eye-opening. And in many cases, like, going to a place that has communism, you can form a different opinion than you can if you're just reading about it in a textbook.
Yeah, it's really humbling. I remember some of the small beach towns in Brazil that I drove through, and seeing like these kind of shack-like houses that don't have power, indoor plumbing or anything. And, the people there are really nice and really happy. And, they live in kind of a paradise right by the beach. I was driving past like a kid washing his donkey or something out on the street. And it's just, it's really humbling and gives you a little bit perspective about our own country and where we live.
And so as someone who is more like, detail oriented, has a lot of work responsibilities, what was kind of your process like, for example, when you were taking a longer trip to Brazil? Like, how did you set that time up in terms of having to like, get the work stuff you needed to get done, but also enjoying the travel?
Well, it was kind of those rules and processes that I had in place, and the team that works with me is, trained well enough to handle most things. If I had to do a call, like most of those countries did have internet and cell reception, so I could jump on conference calls via web or something if I needed to. And I was able to check my email pretty regularly just in case. In fact, the longer trip to Brazil, I think my company grew while I was there. So it was kind of like unplugging a little bit was actually a benefit to me.
Nice. And so you were kind of working, doing more and more international travel. What kind of spurred the idea of doing a bigger trip in the US?
Probably my dog. I had just gotten a puppy, German Shepherd. His name's Raphael, last January. So when we went on the trip in October of last year, he was about 8 or 9 months old. And I didn't really like the idea of leaving him at home for 2 or 3 weeks by himself, or boarding him or having someone else watch him. He was still needing to be trained and a lot of attention. So I started thinking about, how could I travel with the dog and where could we go? International sounded kind of complicated, long flights and stuff. I've taken him on planes before, but wasn't really what I was thinking of doing. And then I read Travels with Charlie for the first time by John Steinbeck about his RV trip with his dog back in 1960. And his was 3 months long, and he went to like 30 states. And it really just inspired me, and I loved the idea of being back out on the road. And I had just gone through a breakup and wanted to get out of LA for a couple weeks. So I just started kind of researching different kinds of RVs and different states that we'd want to go to. And that plan came together pretty quickly. To go, we rented the RV for about 3.5 weeks last October.
Yeah, that sounds like a great trip. And I'd be curious to know where you went on your trip.
We started in LA. We went through a little bit of Nevada and then into Utah. Went to Zion National Park, Provo, Salt Lake City, and then drove up through Wyoming, did Yellowstone, then went up to Montana, did like Bozeman and Billings, because I have a friend in Bozeman that I wanted to see. And then I went back west through Idaho, Washington, and then south through Oregon and back to California.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great trip. Those are some of my favorite states in the US. And I know you listed like a fifth of the states in the country, but those are some of the best ones, I think.
How did you decide, like, kind of what was the process like from that start of like the spark of I'm going to go on this trip to finding the right RV, and then also like planning out which states you wanted to go to?
Yeah, first I bought a big map of the United States and hung it behind my desk at home. So I just kind of like staring at it every day or subconsciously thinking about it. So that was probably like 2 weeks before I really landed on an itinerary. It was just kind of like having that staring at me every day. And I did go to different RV rental places in person and like looked at them, new ones and used ones. And there's a couple of different companies that have like fleets of RVs, but I thought they all looked kind of cookie cutter. So I ended up going to one of those RV rental websites. The one I used was Outdoorsy, and it's just where people can list their own RV to rent. So I rented mine directly from an individual, and he had outfitted his with a newer bed and additional generator and all these kind of things to make it nicer. And I really liked the idea of having a nice bed and kind of a whole self-contained setup. So I got a 36-foot Fleetwood Southwind. It was a 2004 for the 3.5 weeks. And I booked it on the website. And then I used a few other apps to kind of help plan the trip. There's one called Road Trippers that I used to plan the basic itinerary of the road trip. And then there's an app called Free Roam that I used to find BLM land, Bureau of Land Management, where you can park for free. So we stayed at some national parks and some RV parks, but mostly I liked just kind of boondocking and being out on our own, just me and the dog, so he could be off leash.
Yeah. And so did you pick it up like right in the heart of LA?
Yeah, it was, the RV owner was in Long Beach, which is about 15, 20 minutes south of where I am.
Had you ever driven anything that big before?
No. So I was a little nervous. I don't even own a car right now. I haven't owned a car in like 5 or 6 years. So
Nice.
I just Uber everywhere in LA because I work from home. So if I have to go to a meeting, I'll just Uber. And usually if I have to go somewhere, far distance, I'll like rent a car on Turo or something. But yeah, when I was a kid in Oklahoma, my dad had an RV for several years and we'd go to campgrounds and stuff, but I had never driven anything like that. So I did invite a few people to kind of pop in along the way. Most of them weren't able to, but my brother came with me for the first 5 days of the trip. My big brother lives in San Diego, and his birthday was on October 6th, which was like, one of the first days of my trip. So he was able to come for the first 5 days, spent my birthday with him, and it made it a lot more, you know, comfortable for me to be able to get to know the RV and how to set it up and everything. And I wasn't just on my own. So that made it a lot easier. And then when we got to Salt Lake City, he flew back to San Diego to go back to work. And then along the way, I just kind of like met up with a couple of friends along the way too.
Yeah, that sounds really fun. And it's interesting. We haven't rented an RV or anything like that, but almost 10 years ago now, we did a road trip through Australia in a van. And it was like other side of the road. They didn't explain anything to us about like the driving rules in Australia. They just like sent us on our way, and we were in like downtown Melbourne. And I just remember being like, oh my God, we're going to die. And that was making me think of that as you were talking about picking up your RV like in the middle of LA.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have friends that have done the van camping stuff and they loved it. I have one that did that in Australia too, and it sounded amazing.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like, and you can probably relate to this from being in an RV. I think it's just a really fun way to travel. Like in general, road trips are pretty cool. And if you're able to just kind of sleep wherever you want and be kind of more connected to nature, I feel like that makes it so much more fun.
Yeah, and I think it's relatable during COVID too, because a lot of people don't want to stay at a hotel or fly on a plane or take a cruise, obviously. So being able to just kind of like be self-contained, have your own kitchen, your own bed, bathroom, like you can just park off the grid if you have enough propane and food and water. So I think, more and more people are probably doing it this year anyway.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I know camping as well. I think like camping equipment is sold out everywhere.
Yes.
And so what was it like, you've got this idea of what a road trip's going to be like in your head. And then, those first few days on the road, you have the support of your brother. What was it kind of like those first few days on your own out there as you're kind of, into the heart of the trip?
Yeah, after my brother left, it was definitely lonely. I mean, I left town because I was like sad about the breakup and just wanted to, get out and think about things. And then, it was funny after Aaron left, I was just like, oh, now I'm really lonely. So I was out there by myself. But, I had the dog with me and, we'd have campfire and I'd cooked a lot on the trip and, we'd sit out under the stars. And a lot of the places that we stayed at, we didn't have cell phone reception or Wi-Fi or anything. So I was really off the grid. But yeah, I mean, it's weird for me. Like a lot of my most memorable experiences traveling have been traveling with someone. But in some ways, this trip by myself in the RV, traveling by yourself, you can learn more about yourself and reflect a little bit more, I think. So it's tough to say which one's better, but I think it did help me grow as a person. And I did, have a lot of time to think, especially with having no one there and no reception and no ability to just stare at my phone.
Yeah, definitely. We've talked a lot in the past about just how, like it can be so valuable to get into those moments of maybe moments of boredom or moments of loneliness, because the life we live nowadays, they really don't come up very often. There's so many things that are there to distract you or to kind of like numb any feelings you might have, but to actually get out and experience them. And I think travel is one of the best things for that. And traveling solo, especially, having to kind of like sit with those feelings for a while, and then you kind of, you learn from why you're feeling that way and you're able to move past it.
Yeah, I think our addiction with technology and our phones is bad for us. Like I think it's funny that my company, I make money, running social media ads and accounts and, doing things on social media. But my column that I write on Forbes is about innovation. And most of the articles, or a lot of the articles that I've written have been about, how it'd be good for you to get off of social media and get off of technology. So, it's a little contradictory, but I really do believe that, and the way that just social media makes us think about things and, what people are posting and, feeling FOMO, especially in a big city. Like I never felt that when I was out on the road, and, it didn't matter if it was a Friday night. I was sitting by a lake somewhere with the dog, just having a campfire and cooking out. Like there's no place I would have rather been.
And so not a super new, but as a relatively new dog parent, what was it like kind of making that change to being traveling and having to take care of a dog while you're traveling?
It was easy because, I think there's probably different kinds of people that take RV trips, and a lot of the people I saw driving anecdotally were, older, retired, and they had like small dogs with them. But I do think some people like to camp and go backpacking and travel with a big dog. And my goal is just to let him off leash and let him just explore and be happy. And a lot of the times that was a success because we stayed at a lot of big empty campgrounds and like ranches and stuff. And, I think that one of the things that I talk about in the book was this idea of a pet bucket list and bucket lists in general. So when I was working for that producer, I think 5 or 6 years ago, had developed an idea called Pet Bucket List. And it wasn't about like taking a dying dog to go do something because that would be depressing. But, so it's not like the last hoorah of bucket lists, how it's kind of portrayed in movies sometimes. But this idea that, it was a 9-month-old dog and I'm taking him out into the world and all he's known is Los Angeles and fences and leashes and rules. And just taking him out into nature, into all these forests and national parks and beautiful places. And I think it was a really nice way for him to like kind of start his life to see, that that's all out there. And I think that, so the idea of a show was kind of like taking dogs to do amazing things. But the way that we usually think of bucket lists of like way off in the future of I'll do this when I retire, once things are stable or whatever, I think is the wrong way to look at it because, COVID again is a great way to illustrate this because, during April, May, a lot of us weren't even allowed to leave the house except for essential errands. They closed the beaches here, couldn't do anything. And the idea that you're just going to put some travel off or some bucket list off to the future, you might not have that future. Like that opportunity might not exist a few months from now or a year from now. So I think that the idea really was that your bucket list should be things that you do right now and things that you go, say yes to and just make it happen. And, even if, I don't have tons of money, it's not like I did this trip because I was wealthy. I just, made a plan, decided how much the budget could be and kind of like plan toward it. And then, if I had to put some stuff on a credit card and pay it off later, that was worth the investment for me to go have this experience and for my dog to have that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love even the verbiage you use around that, like considering this experience you're having as an investment. I think that's one of the things like Ryan and I have always considered the majority of our travel is to be something that we're investing in, an investment for ourselves, our personal development, our happiness and that type of thing. And to me, that's so important.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Amazing. And so you talked a little bit about having or bucket lists a little bit, but I'd be curious to know what some of your highlights from the trip were.
I think, I met a lot of interesting people, and it was kind of like what I mentioned with Cuba, where you get some perspective and meeting locals and a little more humbling because I think living in LA for 10 years has made me more of a jerk where like a waiter is slow or something, I might get snappy or something. It's like, I want this now, or kind of like LA attitude. And bringing me back to like the Oklahoma roots where I grew up and these kind of small towns where people move at their own pace. And you see a kind of a difference of what's important and how you treat people and, people wave at each other when you're driving past and all those kind of things. It was just like a much better vibe and experience than a big city for me. But I think most of my favorite memories from the trip, they're the times where I got to see my friends or my brother were really special. And the times where my dog was running around like it was the best day of his life, I thought was really amazing. And I took a bunch of videos and photos of him. But there, almost every stop, it was like he was having the best day of his life. He discovered snow or rain for the first time and, all these different kind of places and topography and stuff. And so, I don't know, I think that kind of bonded us a little bit more. And I don't know, those memories that I have with him were really special.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. It's kind of like the idea of I guess getting to see stuff like through a child's eyes. I feel like you get that a little bit with an animal, and especially a young animal where they're just so curious and they're so playful. And I think snow is an excellent example of that. Like just being so confused about what this like white cold thing is and just playing in it in this way that, especially for me as a Canadian, I definitely do not do anymore.
Right. Yeah, no, I mentioned in the book too, the movie Office Space, and the main character is telling the therapist, he's like, every day is the worst day of my life. Yesterday was the worst day of my life. Today is the worst day of my life. Tomorrow will be the worst day of my life. I was kind of comparing that to my dog, of saying like every single day on this trip was the best day of his life. And just being able to see that, like what you said, through a child's eyes or something, it's a good reminder of like, why am I feeling sad or lonely or anything? I could appreciate this moment that we're in, just like this dog is.
Yeah, definitely. And they're not analyzing things. They're just like fully involved in living their lives, fully kind of present with whatever's going on.
Right, exactly.
And so was it your first time in most of these Pacific Northwest states, or had you kind of visited them prior to road tripping through them?
I'd gone to Montana the year before and done some tent camping with my friend that lives there, but I had not been to a lot of them. I'd never been to Idaho, Washington, or Oregon before, so that was my first time in those states.
And what kind of, did any like places really like catch you, or have any experiences like on the drive where you're like, oh, this place looks like really, really cool. I never would have thought about traveling here before.
I had never really considered Idaho, but I went to the top section through Coeur d'Alene, and I remember the drive through the state line into Idaho from Montana was just like, it was during sunset and going through like a mountain pass, and then I saw the sign that said "Welcome to Idaho," and just like one of the most beautiful sunsets I'd ever seen. And then the town of Coeur d'Alene is beautiful. Staying there, and yeah, I mean, I think especially with like global warming and stuff, the hot places are going to keep getting hotter, and places like Idaho that I hadn't thought of before are just going to get more and more appealing. But there was also in Washington, I stayed by Mount Rainier at Mount Haven Resort, which is an RV park, like a mile south of Mount Rainier. And it rained most of the time we were there, so we didn't do too much hiking. But even just like making coffee and doing some writing with the windows open, listening to the rain, and with the dog there, like something really calming about that area. And it was a beautiful, beautiful park. And I'd never been there before, so that place sticks out to me for some reason. But nothing like crazy really happened there. It was just a really peaceful, relaxing atmosphere.
Yeah, I love that. Sometimes those are like the best memories, is just being like just really at peace and enjoying the landscape and the scenery that you're in.
Yeah.
And so we've mentioned it a little bit off and on throughout the episode, but you wrote a book on these experiences called Travels with Hafa. Can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration for the book and what it was like to actually turn this trip into a book?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't really the intention to go out and do this for a book. I think once I got to Idaho, that night that I parked in Idaho, I started typing up some notes about the day before. And then throughout the trip after that, I started writing down like the names of people and places that I'd been to. So I did take a lot of notes on the second half of the trip. And then when I got back home at the end of October, I'd written a fair amount, but it was all kind of like journaling, kind of, not stuff that anyone else would probably find interesting, but it was all just kind of like therapeutic for me. And then I set that aside and went back to work and focused on other things, and months went by. And then in March, I actually went to like London and Iceland for a little bit. And then when I got back that week, they just shut everything down because of COVID. And then they shut the beaches down and everything else. And I was just kind of sitting here at home. And early April, I decided, all right, I'll just write this out. And I'd thought about it a fair amount because I had all those notes. And then during the month of April, I wrote out a first draft while sitting here in quarantine. And I think a lot of that was just kind of for selfish reasons of, it gave me some kind of purpose and some project to focus on through, it was kind of a stressful time and a lot of things were going on here. And it allowed me to relive those experiences. And, throughout however many hours a day I was writing, I was kind of back on the trip again in my mind. And it was really fun. It came together really quickly, and it was really easy for me to write it because all I felt like I had to do was remember what happened and just put it on paper. So I thought it was a really therapeutic, cathartic experience of writing that first draft during April. And then I sent it to a friend of mine to read and give me notes, and it took him a few weeks to look at it. So during the month of May, I didn't even look at it. I kind of got it out of my head. Wrote a couple articles, did some other stuff. And then about a month later, like in June, I did a couple of edits and revisions and polished it. And then like July, kind of proofread it, got a cover ready. And then from then till now, it's just been kind of getting it ready for publish. And, now it's going out in a week from when we're recording this. So it's been a bit of a process to get it all together, and I'm self-publishing it, but I'm really excited to get it out there now.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And I know it's something that like I think lots of people who try to live more adventurous life think about, but like you mentioned, it is a lot of work to go from that like, hey, I should do this, which is kind of an easy point to get to like, hey, this is coming out. I've got like a beautiful cover. I've got it edited. I've got everything put together. It is a lot of work. So definitely like, you should give yourself a pat on the back for that. And I'm kind of curious for other people who have maybe had a cool travel experience that they have thought like, hey, this would be something really cool for me to capture and to write about. What would your advice be to someone who's like thinking about putting together a book that centers around a travel experience they've had in terms of actually how they can make it interesting and how they can get that done?
Yeah, I think the idea of writing a book sounds more daunting than it is. And especially right now, if people are still kind of quarantined or whatever, like it's a great time for you to find a project like this. But anybody can do it. Because of my marketing background, I've helped a number of clients with their books. And I'm a talent manager for a woman named Janice Bryant Howroyd, who's the first African-American woman to build and own $1 billion company. I've learned all sorts of things from her, just about life and business. So she's been, really, really important in my life. But I worked on her book, which was nonfiction, just kind of in the editing phase and publishing it and marketing. And that was part of what inspired me to do the last little book, which again was very short, but I wanted to put it out and try marketing it and see what the process was like. And it was pretty, digestible, like, the easiest way to eat an elephant is one piece at a time, is the phrase, I think. So it's like just kind of putting that work into context and seeing like, all right, well, right now I don't need to worry about the publishing or the marketing of it or anything. I just need to like get the story down on paper. What happened in Wyoming or whatever, and just kind of like spending a couple days on Wyoming. So I think that it is achievable. It's not that daunting of a task. I think a lot of people could do it. But there's also a lot of resources out there of like people that could read it and give you feedback or editing or proofreading and all the other things that you might think are stopping you from doing it. Like I wouldn't worry too much about your prose or even the structure or anything yet. I would just start writing it down, and then as you reread it and edit it, like I probably read this book over 100 times in the editing process of going over it, and moving things around and deleting a bunch of stuff. And like I said about what I wrote while I was driving, a lot of it was just kind of like journaling nonsense, but it was all stuff that I ended up taking out of the book, but it helped me, put on paper, like what led me here, and I wrote a lot of the, stuff about my past trips or career, or what got me to this place. And it helped me to just get that out of my head before I really started writing it. And then I just made an outline of all the different cities that I went to and then just started filling them in. So I mean, I don't know if that's really helpful advice, but I think my main point would be that if you're thinking about writing a book about your travels, then just do it. Like it's easier than you probably imagine.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like you mentioned a little bit earlier as well, such a cool way to bring some of those memories back to life. I think it makes me think about when we started this podcast, we went back into some of our old travel journals from our first big adventure. And so we were, podcasting about these things 2 years later, but I'm able to go through and look at our notes from like going to Iceland or going to Running of the Bulls and all these other experiences that we hadn't thought about in years. But it kind of like lets you relive them by going through the creative process, talking about them.
Yeah, the creative process of writing it. And then even like right now with you guys getting to talk about it, I'm thinking about the trip. And 10 years from now, if I read this book again, it'll remind me of what was going on in my head and different things that I find important at this time in my life. And yeah, I think that it can be helpful. Like my goal with the book was never number of sales or how much money I'm going to make. I just wanted to I think it was for those selfish reasons that I mentioned earlier, but also to just kind of lay more of a foundation of myself as an author. And, maybe the next book I write will be a fiction novel or something, or maybe I'll do another travel story. But I just wanted to kind of prove to myself that I could do it. And especially during the time of being quarantined, of just giving yourself a project to work on, this was the best one that I could have chosen because of what you just said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like with life in general, it's cool to think about the legacy that you'll leave behind. And this book and your story is going to be something that's going to be around, even after you're old and long gone. You know what I mean?
Totally.
And so it's a bit of a weird time for people who like to travel and adventure and work remotely because of the global pandemic. But what's kind of the future looking like for you in terms of adventures? Do you have anything planned? Are you kind of just waiting things out?
Lately, I'm just doing like Airbnbs and stuff in California. I would like to do another of these RV trips again soon, so I can take the dog and go boondocking and just park wherever we want. Because that's something we could do right now. With the weather and stuff, I think September, October is not a bad time to do it. My last trip in the RV was last October. I don't have anything crazy planned right now, but it would probably be something with the dog again. And I've done a couple of trips with him recently to Airbnbs, and we're going to do another one next week too.
Amazing. That sounds awesome. It's kind of like a silver lining of the pandemic, I guess, to explore your own backyard a little bit more.
Yeah. I'm just going to go like an hour away to Malibu, but stay in a cool place that has a pool, and the dog loves water. So I'm sure it'll be a really fun few days.
Yeah, that's awesome.
All right. And so for anyone who wants to go find the book and then check out and follow you further, Nathan, where should they go to find all that information?
Well, the book's called Travels with Hafa. My name is Nathan Pettijohn. So if you just Google my name, it should pop up pretty easily.
Awesome. Yeah. And we'll put links into the show notes on theworldwanderers.com so anyone can go over to Amazon and check it out from there as well.
Awesome.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today, Nathan. This has been a really great conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want more, make sure to check out The World Wanderers Insider, available on Patreon at patreon.com/theworldwanderers.
For show notes, head over to theworldwanderers.com. Find us on social media at The World Wanderers Podcast and join the private Facebook community at World Wanderers, a community for travelers.
You can always get in touch with us at info@theworldwanderers.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps us find new listeners.
See you next time.